if you've got questions, please ask them. And I've explained to both Andrew and David that you're involved in a project which is working inside the town camps. They've been working on a house which is a prototype house, actually. That was their previous project, which was also in Alice Springs, and we were dealing pretty closely there with climate, with ideas of country, ideas of 1788, a more broad, view, I suppose, of what country might be. So we've started perhaps off a bit of a low base, because architects don't always talk about this in architecture school, I suppose, but some of the discussions we've been having have been just amazing. So, where do you start? But maybe we can just start a little bit around climate, actually, because, and maybe a question to David, but it might be for you too, Andrew. A lot of the problems that you're coming across in the houses, and even that story that you told us about what it might be like to live in a town camp, how much of that do you think is related to climate and the fact that it gets hot here, or is it more cultural than it is about the place?
I think, well, certainly from our work, a lot of it's not so much cultural. It more relates to poverty. Functioning houses isn't really down to the fact that our particular work is with Aboriginal people. That's largely irrelevant. There are some cultural sort of aspects.
But for instance, just to drill down, so why don't we see that around here? We don't see it around here as much. I know that you made a comment that yes, you do find it around here.
It's definitely here. You just don't see it.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the point. That it is here. It's
Absolutely.
just that it's hidden by.
Yep.
The system or the way that we...
And look, different levels of poverty are different and come out in different ways in different communities, but we're about to run a housing health project soon in New York. And the same issues, we ran a project in this community of high-rise apartments, very poor black neighbourhood just out of Brooklyn called Brownsville, New York, about 10 years ago. Surveying houses found almost the same level of dysfunction in houses in the centre of New York. The same level of poverty and the same, a lot of the same issues underlying the same communities. Climate. Climate is a ever-evolving sort of beast, isn't it? And traditionally in the past, the impacts of temperature for us is, if you notice, was further down our list of priorities. I think there's certainly argument that with climate change and certainly, with where it's heading, that will probably change, and that will certainly push itself further up the list. There's an Uhuru paper about to come out that did a very interesting research looking at just the impacts of overcrowding on temperature control in houses. So it was by far the biggest impact on the temperature of the house with the number of people in it. Way beyond whether the house had insulation or any improved qualities was the level of overcrowding. And overcrowding, so they're all interlinked. Overcrowding is linked to poverty. If you've got money, you don't have to line up to try and get the very few houses that the government is offering you on a town camp. You have the option to rent a house in Alice Springs, although there is underlying racism kind of preventing that at certain levels as well. So,
and maybe Andrew can chime in here. Is that what we're seeing inside the town camps then? Are we seeing poverty as a way of understanding what's going on there?
I suppose these are always difficult questions. I think what motivates us to ask them in a sense is what's the answer, what's the solution in a sense. And I think human beings are messy. We're messy people. We just make a mess. We never behave as we're expected to behave. We never do the things that people want us to do. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Poverty can be part of that income. Government policies, spending priorities, climate, culture. I mean, you can throw any number of things into the mix, and you're going to get.
Houses work really well with it, just better people.
Yeah, exactly. Because nobody. That's why the drawing is just pristine and beautiful, because there's nobody there yet. That's why all the photographs are always without people, because once the people move in with their dogs and pets and cats and whatever, it all just doesn't look like we want it to look. So it's a kind of messy world, and I suppose in some ways you come to a point where there is no solution. Yes, it's important to advocate and to push for better ways of doing things, and for governments to step up and fund things, and all that work is very important. But in many ways there is no answer. But that doesn't mean you don't do anything. That doesn't mean you don't go out and sort of do the things that you find important and that resonate with you in a sense. So I think the question is something that I understand where it comes from. We're always constantly asking, but in some ways you kind of have to get away from the question, what is the answer? Because we don't have the answer, and architects like to think they have the answer to things, but we're probably even less equipped than many people, than people with a great deal of experience in social sciences or community work or the like. We come with a completely different perspective in a sense. So part of the answer is kind of stepping back a little bit, being quiet, sitting, with the issues, with people, listening, trying to get a sense of what is somebody else's world, and how do I fit into it and come to that. So I don't know, it's a long roundabout way of trying to avoid the question.
Yeah, no, but in that, we're also trying to isolate what we think is the most important thing to solve. And Dave, you've just been talking about what you think, or what the practice Health Habitat believes is the most important thing, which is to make sure people are able to wash themselves, to make sure that the water gets drained away. What you might say the hardware of a house, really. It's the fixtures and operation of the house. And I suppose within that is the health of people, so they don't develop chronic illnesses, they don't die before their time, they don't have lives where they're unable to hold down a job or send the kids to school and things like that. So I suppose, and this is or maybe it's, if I pose it, so is that why you work in these areas? It's because you actually isolate these as being really important issues, and they're very obvious in these places. I know it's a personal thing, but I'm just still wondering, is this what we're doing? Because embedded in finding a solution is also to work out what I think needs to be solved. And of course, if you ask 100 people, you may get, a spread of answers there.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's we've got limited time on this earth. We've only got limited resources. We can only do so much. So yes, we need to kind of focus in a sense. We're sort of forced to in a way. And in some ways, there are 40 answers in this room, and that's a good thing in a way, because we'll all be able to do things that the other person can't or the like. So you do have to kind of focus, I suppose, and that the health habitat model is quite focused in a way, and has managed to somehow zero in on some of those key aspects of a healthy house in order to try to promote health or allow for healthy practices, for people to live healthy lives, with the ultimate aim, as David pointed out, of not worrying about your house, but getting on with your life and kind of doing the things that you find important. Going to church, or going to sport, or hanging out with your family, or doing those sorts of things that we all want to do. We don't want to think about whether or not our toilet's flushing, or the refrigerator works, or we don't want those things to kind of occupy our time. So yes, we've got limited time, limited energy and resources. We do need to do something. What is that thing? In David's case, in Health Habitat's case, it's focusing on some key things to make a house healthier. Perhaps the work that I'm doing with the Fulcrum Agency is, step back quite a bit in a way from the kind of grounded piece, in a way, and looking at, maybe a more sort of, like what happens when people have healthy houses? Like, can you start to think about other things, like more aspirational things? Maybe that's the kind of space that we're occupying in a way, is that other part of the picture, if that makes sense. It's what comes next once not that the house is fixed yet, but what's the next thing? What's the other thing that you focus on? I suppose that's what we're interested in. How do you bring people to the table, have opportunities to have a voice in something, to talk about things other than, daily life, but to think, about things that they dream of or want for themselves and for their kids. And, so there's another kind of level or place, along that plane. So.
Yeah, I mean, the work I've sort of done is in a lot of ways, as I said, is fairly narrow, focused on health. It's quite a lot in that, but it's absolutely not saying that's the only thing that's important. There are a whole lot of other cultural parts of design and a whole lot of things that communities, that are important to communities. And so we don't have a claim that you should only look at health. Absolutely no way. But we also know from sitting down and talking with people that when you first have a conversation, I just want to make sure, how do you want your house designed? I just want that toilet fixed. I want it to work. Is usually the level of the discussion and the focus is they just want that to function. It doesn't say you don't pile other things in as well, but that's sort of where it's at. And in a lot of ways, that's, as a designer, you're getting trained at university with problem-solving skills. You mightn't realise it, but they can be transferred to other disciplines and other areas that you mightn't have thought was actually architecture. But it is still using your design sort of brain to try and solve problems. Yes.
Sorry.
No, go.
Thanks so much for both of you. I think it's very habitat. It's very for me today. And I suppose what drew me to Habitat many years ago was the power of data and how it's delivered and the life that it has in projects. And I wonder if I suppose there's two parts to this. One is you both spoke about what happens in a community once you're there doing a project, but really in many ways that's the end point of a longer process of securing funding and in a way advocacy as well. And so I wonder as well what the data allows you to do, not just to frame the problem you're solving, but to actually put yourself in a position to be there to solve it in the first place in terms of funding, how your project's funded, who's paying you, why.
Yeah.
And what responsibilities do you have to the funding bodies versus the community? How do you negotiate that? Different advocacy. You see that sort of.
Yeah, I mean, data has always been a key part of the Housing for Health work. And unfortunately, certain minds really love data and others sort of don't get it, it means nothing to them. And we've had our most success with ongoing support with programs when we've worked with health departments. So in New South Wales, we've run projects here longer than anywhere now. The Housing for Health project with the Wabakor in Newcastle. It's all funded by New South Wales Health. Health sends us in to train up, work with teams of local people to fix up houses. It's a sort of an unusual program for a health department to be doing repairs and maintenance in houses. But they get the data. They can see that if they can put a little bit of money here, it can keep people out of hospitals and clinics and save them a bucket load down the track. They did a big report after running a project for 10 years in New South Wales, and they looked at all the hospital visitation data and Aboriginal health clinic data from towns and communities around New South Wales. And they compared, so that's every time someone reports, if you go to a report with an ear infection, that gets logged. And where you live gets logged. Every time you go an eye infection, that gets recorded. You go with diarrhea, pneumonia, anything environmental health related gets recorded. So they compare the number of visits to health clinics in communities where they've run a Housing for Health project, compared it with where they haven't, and there was a 40% difference in the number of times people go to health clinics. It's kind of a no-brainer, but even we were surprised at that amount of data. Now, there's a lot of reasons. People are mobile. There's a lot of reasons it's to question the size of that. You might question that's pretty massive, but even if you harbour 20% less time people have to go to a health clinic, so you're a health minister, you go, I don't have to think about that. You're asking me, do I spend $4,000 fixing up that one house, or do I spend $30,000 supporting this position at another health clinic, or $100,000 for a new, $1 million for a new extension to the local hospital? It's a no-brainer. Keep people out of hospital. It's preventative health. So health departments get it. Housing departments struggle. Yeah.
Why do they struggle?
Because housing departments, and they often see themselves as there to look after the bricks and the mortar, not the people. People, that's someone else's issue. I joked before, but a lot of housing departments and people in housing, when you talk to them, they would absolutely love housing. Would be perfect if there were just no people. I'm dead serious. They're just nobody in there, no faults. Sweet, doing our job really well. The house is standing really well. Looks nice, coat of paint, lovely. The people is sort of an afterthought. A lot of the people running those core parts of the department. So it's and every time that's a big question we asked. Every time we absolutely try to use that data to advocate for change. The organisation we're working with in New York, they're right into data. That's what's completely driven them. They're very skilled at attracting funding. They just won a $100 million grant about 3 weeks ago to work on a housing and homelessness project across the US. That's serious money. It's not up to our project, unfortunately. But it's all about the data, and if they can show change, it's very powerful.
It's interesting that slide you showed with the high proportion of non-functioning hardware is due to poor repair and maintenance. You would have thought housing offices would be onto that in a sense. It's an asset in a way. Why wouldn't you see a stat like that and say, all right, well, let's at least maintain, even forget about the people, let's just maintain what we've got. Why they don't kind of respond in some way to that.
Yeah, you have these arguments. There's a mouse plague just over the range here at the moment in New South Wales. So when we do projects, we've been putting vermin kits on ovens, so the mice can't get into the oven. They get into the oven, it's finished. They live in the insulation, they eat the wires. Your oven's over. Goodbye. Suddenly it's another $1,200. They've got the government's or whoever, the Aboriginal Housing Land Council who runs. They've got to replace the oven. Maybe they've got the money. Maybe they don't. People just have to put up with it. But you can sometimes pitch an argument, say, look, you might want to look after your asset a bit more. Another $150, you can vermin kit your oven. It's going to last a lot longer. It works sometimes, but sometimes it's just deaf ears.
So I'm just going to scan. By all means, throwing questions, but.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Do you think that there needs to be more collaboration between the health department and the housing department? Is there much collaboration?
Should they get married? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We here in New South Wales have a very close collaboration with the health department.
Yeah.
We, to the extent that they sort of take days off, there's a core group of staff in that department here who've been running these projects with us for 25 years. They take time off from their job and come on to have meetings with us, then we go and have meetings with them. It's a very trusting, close working relationship. We have tried to emulate that. We're about to kickstart, after about 10 years, a bunch of projects again in the Northern Territory. And we've been pushing them to try and copy the model, even though we're getting funded by the housing department, who can tend to be a little fickle. Because even though for one moment the flavour of the month seems to be up there, we should be improving health and housing and they should be combining. That only lasts a certain number of years until something else comes along. Unfortunately it just has a limited span. So these things ride on waves, and whilst at the moment it's a flavour of the month up there to sort of be talking, and we're pushing and they're developing an MOU between the health department and the housing department up there. And we're trying to get environmental health officers, people who go out and inspect water quality, a whole lot of stuff, pests, animals, sewage treatment plants to try and work on these housing projects. So we're sort of getting there, but it's constant change. Government's a curious beast.
just moving that into areas. When you're dealing particularly with First Nation groups of people, and in the town camps they are groups of people, I'm just wondering, because there is certainly a disadvantage there, and you might say that they're poor people, and then as we've been discussing, there's outcomes of that, of being poor, and that can lead to a whole lot of things. But
not everyone's in that bucket, mind you. There's a range on the town camps. There's some people who got their shit
completely
together, got a
functional,
job,
yeah.
completely functional. Yeah.
And this is just where it's a slight sort of change of tack. Is that how much is and I'm not talking about the dysfunction, but the way that people operate their lives is of culture, and it's of a way that they're understanding what they should be doing during a day, and particularly, for instance, their relationship to the extended family, and that generosity which is extended outwards, which you know my white culture doesn't sort of has, but it doesn't have to that extent, you know. And so I suppose the question is, and it's the really interesting issue that was discussed by Bruce Pascoe in Dark Emu, was this idea of Aboriginalism and socialism. And then when you look at a town camp and you look at what goes on there, the people who live in the town camps, have they got a better idea of how community works, perhaps? And is it people on the outside who see this as such a strange thing, and is it that we're not getting it? And it's meant to be a provocative kind of question. But what is it about the way that First Nation people gather and work in their lives, what they actually do during the day? How does that sort of describe the operation inside a town camp? And I hope you get what I'm sort of trying to sort of weed out here. But is there something there that we should be picking up on, and it shouldn't be something that we're always wanting to repair? Or does it need to be supported in a particular way that perhaps we are supporting it in the way that it's meant to be, but perhaps there's an element of support that we're not providing because we're not really understanding what's at the core here. And I realise that we're all three middle-aged white men here that talking about this, but I'm just interested because you've been working in these areas, you've been working in these places for so long, you know. Oh, I'm just saying that we are obviously looking at these questions from distance to some extent. So I just wonder what you might think about that.
I know, just to jump in, I know Andrew and I are both very privileged to spend time working at Tangadera Council under a man called William Tilmouth, who was a very inspirational kind of leader and mentor for everyone who worked in that organisation across every aspect of it. Incredible man. And I remember he kind of quite sadly he was also a member of the stolen generation. Three of these brothers were taken up to Croker Island. The other three brothers were kept in Alice, not taken. All down to the colour of their skin. And he kind of laments that, you know, the church taught them how to say no to their family. You know, so everyone else, you know, has this, you know, can't say no. Extended family come knock on your door, can I have a sleep? You know, it was ingrained in him that no, that is wrong. You will not do that. That's not the right way. It's not the way of the future. This is how to say no to those evil ways. You know, he's very sad about that. He's not rejoicing in it. But certainly, sorry.
No, I was just going to think it's sort of another kind of, in some ways, a way of deflecting the question but answering it in a slightly different way. And that's where it's because I'm not a cultural expert, so it's difficult for me to talk about the experience of others and what their lives are like and you know what's important to them. But you can see where two worlds collide at certain moments, and then you you see that there's a difference in a sense, and you can just take the simple question in some ways of timing and scheduling and programming. Let's say you're doing an architectural project and you need to get the brief done by day after tomorrow, and you got to meet and do your consultation, and you make phone calls, you get everything set up, and you show up to the consult, engagement, whatever, and there's nobody there. You thought you'd made all the arrangements, and what's going on, And so there you've got kind of two different kind of world views about what's important clashing. What's important to me as the architect is to get my brief done, to get the design
Bureaucrat on
underway.
your back.
Bureaucrats leaning on me to get this finished because the funding is going to run out at the end of the financial year, and there's no more funding next year, whatever. So you've got all you kind of, as a white person, I've got all this kind of this world behind me, and I come to this to do this work, this engagement, and nobody's there. Look, auntie's sick, gone to the hospital, child's got a cold and is home, something else happened, footy's on, whatever, it doesn't matter. There's other people have different priorities, and so that's where you kind of have these moments of, and you kind of don't know when they are until they happen. I made plenty of mistakes going into town camps and asking for people by name, only to find out that name is not being used anymore because somebody's died and they have that. The person had that name, so we're not supposed to be using that name. So when I go charging in asking for, Bill or Bob or whoever it might be, nobody wants to talk to me because I'm saying the wrong thing, but I don't know it. So in some ways, it's kind of a trial by fire in a way. Where those moments are where you're coming up against them. But the key thing as sort of practitioners is you have to relax with that. You have to sort of be okay with that, and it's not about your agenda in a way. It's about something that works for both of you, and you don't know when that is until it happens in a sense. So you got to kind of roll with it. It's a sort of hard thing, and maybe it's only something that comes with age. I don't know, but you just have to let it go.
One thing I kind of talking about, similar also on a slight tangent, but anyway. After a couple of years of living in Alice Springs and working for Tunganjira, the Tunganjira Council, it's different to the Alice Springs Town Council, they're completely different. In a lot of ways, town councils are seen as looking after white landowners. That's kind of why they were set up. If you're a ratepayer, we're there for you, no worries. But if you're not, forget it. You don't pay us money, we're not interested, we're not going to pick up your trash. And Tunganjira sort of was there to fill this gap. But anyway, working for them, realising that it's a very bicultural town. There's black and there's white, by and large. And how people move and traverse through, and people's ideas, as you said, of scheduling, but how people actually just physically move through this town is completely like different parallel universes. You might go from here to there and go down that road and down that street. Someone else might make the same route, completely different path or crossover, and you don't necessarily cross paths. It's quite surreal in a lot of ways. But people just have a very different way of moving about and relating, and there's all sorts of reasons why it's a different route, why a different path, and you don't really understand it. You don't, in a lot of ways, need to understand it. You just need to be aware of its existence. In some way, just saying you sit down, community development is kind of what we do, and that's a big skill that you really just got to learn as on the job as you go. How to actually sit down in the dirt and have a conversation with someone, and try and just sort of understand what somebody wants, and try and just be open to stuff that is going to come your way that you hadn't anticipated.
I've said to the students that in my time of being there, which is just a few weeks every year, I've always thought that we were translators in some ways. We were sort of taking something that was given to us from that system, and because we had knowledge of this system, which is the government, kind of very linear, non-linear, linear, and we were sort of translating between the two. So we were able to take what was being said in ways and through observation and listening and so on, and create drawings that the other guys understood, which is the data argument as well. Is actually compiling something that doesn't want to give up its knowledge in a white way. It doesn't want to give it up in a very literal way. So you become a bit of a translator to sort of, move that into other things. But I'm just, again, an open question. If this thing, what is the future of the town camp? If money became available and things were, in the place I live, it's not flash, but everything works and everybody waves and the plants grow and everything seems quite sweet. What does the town camp look like in that scenario? Where there is no, where 20 people can come on the weekend for the footy match and it doesn't create, pools of water on the ground and all that sort of thing. Like, what?
In a lot of senses,
What does that look like?
To jump in, it's not actually about money or what it looks like.
No, I don't think it probably is either.
As an example, when the government came, not long after I started at Tunganjira and offered the town camps $100 million of upgrades. They said, we're going to come, actually first they offered $50 million of upgrades and we're going to fix up all your houses, we're going to build all these new houses and put new street lighting in. In return, you need to lease your land to us for 100 years. We're going to take over. We know best. And after a lot of consultation, people went, thanks, no. Unless we have a sense of control and empowered and actually have a sense of control over how we're going to live our life, we're not interested. They upped it to $100 million. The same answer.
In 40 years.
And 40 years. And they still said, thank you, but no. And the only reason they had to sign on in the end was said, okay, how about as a third offer, we're going to sort of take your land off you anyway if you don't sign. And they went, oh, well, it's not really a choice. So, the federal minister stood up in the floor of Parliament in Canberra and basically said, we're going to compulsory acquire all the Alice Springs town camps, and it's going to be ours. They're out of the picture. So then there's no buying. We want to have these things are important to us. We want to keep even down to some of the details. Around the design of your yard, so it can accommodate families, so you don't have to house them inside. You can actually have a culturally safe space for people to live. There's a lovely veranda there. That's yours. I can still live inside in a little bit of peace and a little bit of comfort. I don't want a 5-bedroom house. I want a 2-bedroom house because it's much easier for me to very politely and not offend say, I'm really sorry, but we're full. Go next door and have a sense of control back in your life. So choosing who lives there, choosing who doesn't live there, what cultural groups come into a town camp, who lives in the house, controlling allocations of the housing. This seems very boring, but it can actually completely upturn the quality of life in a community. These are communities. They're by and large family groupings originally. Now they're a little bit not so much. There's certain, Walpurgis people, for example, are everywhere, and other big nations are sort of find themselves everywhere. But by and large, their background is families, small family groupings. People are pretty protective of that, aren't they? Keeping that, it's a community.
In the town camps, what's the relationship within the actual town camps to each other, say the people next door and people across? Because I've noticed there was a lot of fences in between the houses, and do you think that
fences are great?
Yeah. do you think that if they could just get rid of them, that they would really mind? Because considering their relationship to each other, or relationship to their neighbour, or...
Well, I did a consultation, so I'm just for standard design. We did the standard designs up in the top end. And we did this sort of consultation process with communities, and fences came up a lot. And people said, we need fences. Fences are really good. And you challenge you, don't you? Because you think, well, isn't that just your family next door, and that's your other family, your uncle across the road? Well, why do you need these fences? Got all this space. But it gives us the ability to sort of put a little boundary in place around us. Otherwise, I got my house here, got my brother's house here, my sister's house there, and all the kids just running amok in the middle, kicking the footy up against the wall, against the window. There's no boundary. that space in the middle is nobody's. It's everybody and it's nobody, and you can't, control. You've got no control. You want to have control at a community level who comes in. It's also nice to have control at the yard level. It's nice to have control at the house level. You kind of move in. Like houses in a lot of ways in themselves are like small communities. Each, you've got to remember that when you've got a lot of people in a house, you've got like a family in each bedroom. The living room is really a common space. It's like the whole house is a community, and it's a series of communities all come together for this bigger community. Sorry, and
I mean, again, like all those things, everything is also place specific. So there may be places where fences aren't going to be an issue, and it's a question you need to ask. But in some ways, behind the question is we've got this sense of this fabulous communal living opportunity where there are no fences and everyone's sort of sharing everything, and that might be our issue, our thinking. But yeah, you have to test those ideas, I guess, with people and what's important to them in their circumstances.
And also security. For some people, security, it's really important. It doesn't necessarily really high fence, but even a low fence, apart from being really handy for drying clothes on, is another really good use for a fence. Sorry, not mean focus on the fences, but it's, sometimes people just feel really unsafe. Sometimes these communities can be incredibly violent places. And if the sense that if you can have a bit of a boundary, people could just be free to walk up and peer in your window, that's kind of pretty spooky.
And with the overcrowding, is it just family coming in or visitors, or is it people from neighbouring town camps coming in, or what's sort of the issue with the overcrowding? Because just get an idea of who's actually coming into the house.
There's a reasonable amount of literature that's been written on crowding in houses, and in some cases it's physical overcrowding. There's simply not enough room. In other cases, there's arguments that our sense of what crowding is may not be what a particular community's sense of crowding is. But lots of people, visitors coming in, constant sort of movement in families. Alice Springs is a major sort of hub for services. So medical services, the hospitals there, there's shopping there, there's sports activities and things. So a lot of people come in from remote communities, particular times in the year, month, week, whatever it might be, to do their daily activities. So you get a lot of movement. It's a lot of movement through town generally. So lots of families, sometimes wanted, sometimes not, coming in and staying for periods of time. It can often be difficult to get back out to your home community. It's out bush somewhere. Might not be buses going for a while. It could be a rain, event, and the roads are flooded out. So suddenly people find themselves stuck in a place for a period of time. And that's when you get these intense pressures on housing and community. And, you get these. You could probably map and plot the sort of fortunes of the town and what's happening, levels of social unrest and the like, to events and things that happen. So.
There's there's overcrowding, as Andrew said, it's not all bad. Our work focuses on the negative impacts of crowding, but there's positive impacts of crowding, absolutely. Being with family is one of the most wonderful things. The same with dogs, people love dogs. People want to have lots of dogs. There's a lot of negative things about that if they've got mange and scabies and nobody's looking after them or feeding them. But there's a lot of very positive things. Security, sense people love dogs. But there's also a fabulous study on mobility, which you can look up, the Tunganjira Mobility Study. It's probably a decade old now, but it actually maps exactly over a year. It was a lot of research done with the Tunganjira Research Hub, mapping mobility patterns throughout town. And the study they found, said, okay, well, instead of the 1,100 people that the census says, when the census came with their little yellow bags and knocked on the door and, nobody's home, so, there's no one lives here. They said there's 1,100 people. Well, there's actually about 3,500 people living there at any one instant. they're not all permanent residents. There might be 2,000, 2,500 permanent residents. There's probably another 1,000, 2,000 visitors at any one point. But yeah, mostly family. Mostly have a connection to that camp.
Can I ask a question?
Not all welcome.
Sure.
On the back of your question, with you discussing with the communities a lot and having this kind of understanding of what's happening and going back and forward between the council and designing and things, are there any particular moments that you've seen that a design intervention has had like a huge impact, like a specific, there's been a specific thing, like I know that you showed those attachable bathrooms and things like that. Are there any things that you've done that you've been like, wow, that's really worked? Or has it all just been like...
Yeah, I've certainly got my proudest moment, easy in my mind. Washing machines. We did a lot of work working with communities on surplus rent in one town camp to the next, and working out how to install industrial washing machines in houses. And it's not just simply what sort of machine, how you install it. We got a little angled frame bolted down. We designed a maintenance system to maintain. They're like the Speed Queens, the ones you get at the laundromats. And it was working with people to give up their surplus rent, community by community. Some are happy, some thinking, well, I've got a washing machine, what do I want to give them? And to see the greater value of the community. By the end, we got them into every single house. And as we put them in the camp, overnight, yards were just full of washings. This myth that people aren't going to use these things. Like, it was instant. Like the fence lines, the clotheslines, just draped full of washing. It was an amazing overnight impact. And we kind of know that the impact of a washing machine is so critical. And it was also, focusing on servicing the machine and keeping the maintenance. But yeah, it's a very particular item, but certainly probably one of my happiest moments. Until the government took over and decided, we don't do washing machines anymore. We'll just, sorry, they're on your own. And one by one, they all fell apart again. But,
I'd certainly say the community center work that's been done, certainly through the UON elective and other programs. Community centers have been very popular, very successful. And that's,
were there always community centres, or
they've always
what's
been,
the history of
like
those?
they call it community facility. If you look at the old maps, CF, I think is how they refer to them. They've always they've been there for, as part of the kind of master planning of the housing. Generally, there's always been a community facility, and they've changed in use over the years. They used to have clinics attached as part of them. You used to get a visiting health professional come in to do checks and things like that. That program might have been defunded, so the clinic became a little classroom or something. So they're kind of changed over the years, but there's always been a kind of hub, if you will, for community activity. And the work that we've done over the last few years through the UON program and through other funding streams to upgrade some of those community centers has worked pretty well. But it's not just a design solution. It also depends on people being able to manage and operate and run it, and community buy-in, and a whole range of things that kind of influence the success or failure of an architectural proposal, in a sense. So it's critical that that all comes together. And the wonderful thing about Tungajeera Council, when it's working at its best, is it's got so many good, knowledgeable, experienced people there, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, who know how to work, how to get things to work and keep them operating, provided there's financial resources, of course, so that we could work with, not in a vacuum, designing something, handing it over. We could work with Tungajeera Council and people in youth services, or in old people's services, or in health-related activities, and say, all right, well, how is this going to really work? Not just after we do the design, but when you hand it over and it goes to you. So those are kind of key things.
Because it kind of like completely changes the design process, right? Like it's completely almost reverse, like starting from what it would look like and going backwards to see if that would be effective.
Yeah, that operational component is essential, really. And if you're not on top of that, it doesn't matter what you design.
Yes. Thank you.
So when you that there's a washing and clothes injury. I think it's all related to water supply. So, and then do you think that is the access to enough water or plenty of water should be the starting point in whole design process, because all the aspects kind of said they just direct to the water.
They did what?
So they just direct to the water. So do you think like all the problems are starting with the water, and then because you said washing and then nutrition, and you have to have if there is injury, you have to have washing. So it's like, is it like the water is the problem, are you saying?
No, not the water. The water's the kind of solution in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
but it's sort of
So not having access to enough water is the problem.
not really.
Oh,
in Alice
there's water.
Springs.
There's town water supply. There's as much water there as there is in any house. It's just how you get it, how you deliver the water to the house, and what happens to it when it's there. That's the kind of key thing. But there's plenty of supply, and the water quality is fine.
You might like the taste of it. You ever drank it? It's all bore water. But yeah, strangely, in the middle of the desert, they just tap into the aquifers and pump away. But yeah, water in, water out. Sort of, there's water in. How you manage it? What do you do with it then? And so it's, managing the water. Some places the water is really bad, and how you manage it is critical. The water quality is quite bad. It's very hard. You look at a shower rose in Alice Springs and you're like you're in a cave of stalactites and just hanging down there. And sometimes they're really long. It just means it affects what you install in house, what sort of hardware you use, depending on the hardness and quality of the water. Not the access.
It puts the pressure on the detailing, doesn't it? Because you've got hard water, which then builds up, and I think the water heater is a similar kind of thing. The air conditioners are a similar thing as well, aren't they? I think so. So there's a lot of that. Because I'm conscious that what these group of students mostly have been asked to do is actually to look at the future of these places. So I just want to almost commentary or some comments on this, but there is a very clear boundary to a town camp, isn't there?
Yep.
And that boundary is given by Commonwealth land. I mean, often on the other side of the fence, the boundary is also Commonwealth land. That's true, isn't it?
Yep.
And if you were to
special purpose lease.
Yeah, special purpose lease. And in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or something like that, do you imagine that many of those boundaries would have changed?
No,
I don't.
No, they're staying this, and part of that is that, and again these are questions perhaps that you've answered, but it doesn't mean that Alice Springs is necessarily going to grow into the town camp, or the town camp is necessarily going to grow into Alice Springs.
Well,
would that be right? Or?
I mean, look, I know that there are some town camps. I can't remember which one, but some have looked at different kind of land tenures. How can they unlock the land for development to the benefit of the town camp in some way. So that obviously takes changes to planning regs and community title and things like that. So there's always potential for sort of title to not transfer, but to be different, to allow different things to happen on the town camp than can happen now. Let's say.
Because if someone wanted to open up an architect's office or a small shop or something, would you be allowed to do that?
Probably not. I think some businesses you could do, like with child care centers, maybe still allowable under the planning regs for community uses, zoning. There'd be some minor things, sort of minor businesses that you could possibly do, but nothing of you'd have to check the planning.
There are rules for the lease, basically, and you can't breach those rules.
Yeah.
The underlying special purpose leases, and it'd be, this is granted for this usage.
Yeah.
Be a non-commercial, non-profit community.
So it's a bit like the old bowling clubs and the tennis clubs and community centres. We don't build community centres. It's interesting. The only place that we're building community centres is inside the town camps. And the town camps are quite small, but they all nearly always have a community.
Mostly they do, yeah.
Yeah.
If they don't, it means there's not. Yeah, and the town camps have made quite clear that each town camp wants their own community center. There was a period when there was some consideration of having a single community center that might serve several town camps, and this probably goes back to your question. You know, there are always internal politics amongst families and the like, which we'll never understand or be part of, which means that having a town camp here and asking people from here to go to that community center is not possible. So, you know, the town council, Tonga Council would like to see a model where there's community centers in each town camp. It does put pressure on the operational side of things, though, because you've got to staff those facilities and have people there. So yeah, there's issues to sort of grapple with there. But the Northern Territory planning scheme for, you know, apart from the lease requirements, the Northern Territory planning scheme has particular uses and activities that can occur within a community zoning regulation, which means certain things could happen there if the town camps wanted them to happen. You know, like a child care center or a small, possibly a small shop. But you'd have to look at the planning scheme to see what it's saying these days.
Andrew, a question's come up in Zoom, and I had a similar question around community centres. The question on Zoom is, what do those community centres involve? And I would extend that question by saying, why do you think those community centres are successful? And to contextualise that, it's not uncommon to see either kind of people quite positive about the idea in this design studio around a community centre, and in some cases there's a taboo around it. You know, we've moved past this idea of community centres, which Chris has kind of touched on in his question. But yeah, can we talk a little bit more about, what are those community centres doing? Maybe some of the differences within them and why they're so successful.
Well, my experience is that a lot of them, the success of a lot of them depend on a couple of things. One is people who are able to run them, to manage them, and so those could be both white fellas who work for Tonga Council who are, you know, youth services coordinators, for example, and they show up to the community center 3 days a week, and there's a program that happens there. So a combination of that plus people within the community, within the town camp themselves, who are willing to kind of drive, you know, success or otherwise. Trucking Yards, the Uinta Town Camp, for example, has a very successful community center because a number of community members drive that thing. They've got a very active sports group within the community. They use the community center as a kind of music practice place, as a sports gathering space, a whole range of activities driven by the town camp themselves. Other community centers rely on the motivations of Tonga Council to kind of keep things going, or some combination of the two. So some may be operating every day of the week, and others may only operate a couple of days of the week. You know, and on those days of the week, they'll get great attendance, you know, from residents who are living there. So it'll kind of vary depending on where you are, but you can't build something and not have kind of operational plan in a sense, otherwise it just falls over. And those that seem to work best are those which have good buy-in from the community itself, and resources, financial and human, to run it. So those are some of the kind of obvious answers.
I'd say their flexibility is an important part about their success. Some of them may sit empty for a few years and then become a bit of an overflow visitors accommodation, or maybe become a place where a lot of old people might prefer to live together, and the old people service supports them. Suddenly they get a bit of funding, and then it changes, it becomes an art centre. You know, they're constantly changing and evolving. Everyone's different. One's run as a school and as an art centre. They're all quite different, but that inherent flexibility, I think, is kind of important.
Yes, because it's interesting, in where I live, perhaps where you live as well, community centres don't play a big part. Like I wouldn't even know how to get to my community centre. Yeah, I don't know if we have one or something. So I'm just wondering, what is it then about a collection of 10 to 15 houses sometimes having a community centre and that being really a really significant moment? Like what's going on there? Why is it?
I mean, it's back to the numbers, I suppose. In those 10 to 15 houses, there could be 10 to 15 people. So, you've got 300 or 400 people in that community which will support, the activities that happen.
But why is the community centre important, I suppose, is where I'm heading. When it doesn't seem to be important in other areas, really populated areas. I mean, we have libraries perhaps and cafes and things.
Yeah, it's a good question. Like gathering spaces generally, we maybe libraries for us are places where does anybody still go to the library? I go to the library. Maybe nobody goes to the library. Maybe I'm too old or something. But I mean, they're building libraries all the time. Architects are winning awards for community libraries. They become important hubs. So, whether it's the library or the cinema. Does anybody go to the cinema? I don't know. Maybe I'm talking about the old sort of building types that nobody uses anymore. So yeah, those places where I guess they're safe spaces that everyone owns and no one owns, and everyone can come to them or not come to them. Or this group can come at a certain time, and that group can come at another time, and they sort of work out arrangements for who's there and when, what's happening. But it seems that moment when there's that sort of. It's also, look. Aboriginal people living on town camps have gotten used to kind of a plethora of service providers, government people, police, you name it, kind of coming through town camps and wanting to meet with them to talk about business, whatever it might be. And the community center becomes a kind of place for that to happen. So, and even town camp AGMs, which the governance model requires that they meet annually, talk about business. The community center is the place usually where that happens. So they become the focus of activity, perhaps just because they have become them in some ways. I mean, certainly the issue of flexibility is very important. You're not designing something that's going to fulfill this function today and that's it. It's got to have that kind of ability to become other things over time, I suppose.
I mean, other spaces do as well. Like when I was managing the housing program, our housing office there was a lot more meetings than there's the one a year at that time. Every association and every camp had about 6 to 8 meetings a year. A lot of meetings that our staff were just going out doing. And often they just pick the park or somewhere under the big shady tree in the middle there, somewhere where people naturally drag chairs out and gather. And can be seen from, stand up in the middle and just shout, come over here, come over here, come over here. And often it is the community centre, and often it's just another communal space. Becomes like that as well. It is an important space in a community.
Sure.
So the short answer to your question, I guess, Chris, is what's the future for town camps? They'll exist, perhaps in their cadastral boundary. Town campers have shown incredible resilience over many, many years to kind of push through and survive. What will they look like? Will they look like something different in the future? Difficult to say. Maybe the issue of just simply having a space, a sense of control over it, is enough.
So you would have a strong sense that in 20 years, if you went back to Alice Springs, that all of those town camps would still be there? I mean, we're just hypothesising, obviously. But yeah, that they've got. In my limited knowledge of it, I would agree with that they have quite a strong core and reason to sort of exist. They don't feel like they're going anywhere. And
very political. One of the strong political.
Yeah, strong politics, isn't there?
Strong politics. There's a lot of the Aboriginal corporations in Alice Springs, even more than the top end and other places. Just really there at the beginning, that whole self-determination period in Australia in the 1970s into the 80s became a dirty word in the kind of the anti-intervention in the later years, and now it's revolved again, and it's all a good word again from government. People just
and for that reason they have this inner strength, maybe for all those reasons, and
quite militant in some cases.
Yeah, and that's part of that history and that knowledge and sense of self and identity is that activism, that militancy, that,
Yes.
that sort of sense of place and the importance of that. And now there have been several generations who've grown up on tenant camps, and new generations behind them, and you don't prize that loose
Yes.
so easily.
And kind of related to it, but a different kind of question. Inside the town camps, we know that there's a house and there's a fence, which can be of any height, very tall sometimes, and sometimes just low. And often those fences will be shared. So there'll be a house here and a house here, and then there'll be a fence, and they'll share that fence. But at some point, there's space that isn't inside a fence, and often that's a road. And sometimes it's just things that haven't been built yet or something, But what do you think that there's a pressure on that space in between to actually become something, or do you? And this is almost seeing it from the town camp's point of view. Do you imagine that's leftover space is waiting to be filled, or is it quite sort of happy just being what it is? Like, how do you think the town campers view that land, or how does the town camp as an entity view the space around? And I say it in the context that if I see there's a bit of land across the road which is available, it's not long before someone's built on it. There's something very, and but I'm struck by what I would call the public space of a town camp, which is the space which is not really owned, and it's not road, and it's too big to be pathway. It just seems to be space. And I'm thinking of it's something like Charles Creek, for instance, where there's a lot of that roaming kind of space. What do you think? Do you think there's pressure on that land to become something, or is no? That's just what it is. Or if you came back in 20, 30 years, it would be filled with more houses or more something. What do you imagine might go into that?
I think yes. I think in many cases people may envisage houses to go into certain parts of that land. I think certainly other areas around people's yards already actually are being used, often for overflow accommodation. Example I was trying to give earlier, if you've got a family coming from remote who you don't really like but are kind of related, you may choose to say you can sleep over the fence, not in the yard, because I don't really like you, but I can't say no. You can sleep over there, and then it comes up to the question of where they go to the toilet and where they shower and what amenities. Maybe you can go to the community centre, or maybe you can go next door, maybe you can come into the yard, but you can definitely pitch your swag and your tent over there. So I think a lot of those spaces are used, and those spaces around the fences are important. They're not empty. You mightn't always see them being used, but at certain peak times they absolutely get used.
Sorry to interrupt. Is there any space for communal facilities at all, or is that a thing that never happens? Like, is there opportunities for, say, like, would public bathrooms be used, or everyone feels like it's a personal thing that they do in their own house?
Like amenities, you mean?
Yeah,
like
amenities.
Those
Or would there be, example, if you had like a communal laundry or something where everyone could use the facilities, like, have those things ever been in place, and did they work, and would they work if they were implemented well? They're implemented well, yeah.
They have been, yes. There were a number of, thinking particularly of Charles. And a couple of the other Hoppies, that's right, Hoppies at that end of Charles. So there were communal toilets and showers and things. At the time, probably was fine, but when they were built, but who knows, over time, who looks after them, who's got the financial resources, has time to your council, got enough to look after them, send somebody out to clean them every day, to do those sorts of things. It'd be difficult to know why, but they ultimately were removed. They became places of social unrest, difficulty,
sometimes seen
unwanted
to encourage.
like
Sometimes seen as a way to encourage people to camp.
Yeah.
So a lot of people trying to think of ways to sort of say no thanks.
Okay.
We love you, but next weekend. I know laundries and facilities, there's been pushes at different times to have communal wash facility. When we started doing the washing machines, some camps didn't have much money. We put the machines in the community facility, the main buildings. And then, but as soon as we had a bit of money, we took them out again. And, you know, we just know people to traipse over there and wash it in a communal facility, which isn't maintained. It's nobody's in a lot of ways. It's everybody's and it's nobody's. So there's less looking after and care, and just people we just found to use them much more when they're in the houses. So that quickly became the focus.
And that's part of the kind of history, I suppose, of the town camps in a way. I mean, with houses that may not have had full bathrooms and sort of wet areas and things like that, a communal facility makes sense until you have a house that has those things. That a communal facility doesn't work anymore. So kind of different changes over time, use and what's there, what's been developed.
There's be a bunch of pit toilets around, there's dry toilets around communities. They're probably most are gone, I'd imagine. Yeah.
I was just thinking of those overflow spaces.
Yeah, because I think, like, there is certainly something in architecture. I see space not being used, I want to fill it. There is something, very close connection there, and capitalism is around that, and consumerism is around that as well. So I think it's an interesting question, because the use of public space is different, I think, in a town camp as it is when you just go across the road and walk into the suburbs of Alice Springs. There is a different usage of public space going on. And maybe it reinforces the need in some ways for a fence, because the public space seems so open. Like, it seems quite roaming, and
it kind of seems like, just from like aerials, it seems like it kind of blends into the landscape rather than all the suburbs that we have. It's like, this is the line that the suburb stops or whatever. It's kind of like, it seems like it comes.
They do on the outer edges.
Yeah.
But some town camps have been surrounded by town.
Yeah.
And other is on the edge of town and sort of less so. But the other ones just totally blend out.
Yeah.
But there's an interesting thing here with a more traditional view of what country was, because you can make a strong argument that the way that the country was being managed pre-1788 was actually, the landscape was a form of public space. It was just not the kind of public space that we're accustomed to. And so I still get a sense of that it's being used and managed in a way, but just in ways that don't appear obvious to myself. But there is actually a reason and a rationale for it. I mean, and perhaps therefore it shouldn't be filled.
I mean, there's certainly, if you go back into the history of town camps and the struggle for, land tenure, and a space that you could say is ours. We have this is our space, and the more of that space we have, the better, in a sense. Somebody has decided that we've got this cadastral boundary around us now. And even though we're not using that space over there, we're not going to give that over to anybody or anything necessarily. We're just, there's that sense of ownership and a need to feel like no one's eroding what you fought many, many years to sort of get, in a sense. So my experience is that people haven't been particularly interested in saying, well, let's develop this unused land. We did have the case, I think, perhaps of Robert Houston at Old Timers, when we went out and talked about community facility and some of that space a little bit further to the west, sort of the western corner of the Old Timers, which is largely seemingly empty to us. A lot of campers there who Robert, who's the town camp president, didn't want around, but he couldn't get rid of them, belonged to somebody else, somebody else's family or whatever. So, a lot of contested space, but if you ask Robert, why don't we just bring that fence line in here, somebody else can have that, absolutely not.
Oh no, yeah.
Sorry camps can be a big thing, so we just come left field.
Yep.
When people die, certainly a lot out bush, but you still get sorry camps in town where family might come and camp, set up swags, tents, for extended periods of time. Those sorts of spaces can become important. Some camps also have myriad of sacred sites, which are very, very sort of fundamental. That said, you've got to realise, I don't know if you don't understand, but most of the town camp, there's a disconnect often between the actual traditional owners of Alice Springs and the town camp residents, and they're not necessarily the same people.
Yeah.
You know, as Andrew's slide showed, the mob from Walbury coming in, living in Walbury camp, that's not their traditional land. And there's often a power struggle in Alice Springs between the native title group and the community of that one. And it often gets a bit unpleasant at times.
Because some of the trouble in the town camps is it's my understanding, is caused by other town camps. Is that right? You know, I mean,
not other town camps.
Town campers largely would come up at a lot of community meetings. Visitors is the big issue. Visitor management. How do you control visitors?
but visitors are from
They're coming
from my group. Yeah.
outbush into camps. So it's
Not
not
other
camps
camps.
causing difficulties for other camps. It's visitors who come in, and it's how you manage that, how you deal with that, and everything that comes with that as well. It seems to me, in my experience, to have been one of the biggest challenges for town camp residents, is how to control that. So which goes to the no trespassing orders and things like that. No alcohol signs and rules and things that people can point to and say, look, that's what it says. You should not be here.
It's often family themselves. Like I remember going on a dawn raid with all these other town campers with the police. You normally think, stuff the police, but they were there with the police in their SWAT gear coming in just to move on all these people who there'd been a lot of difficulty going, and questioning, thinking, well, this is not what I thought I'd be doing, lining up behind the cops to sort of try to move people out. But it hits a crisis point, and then people revert to the only mechanism they have at that time, which is
because you imagine they've like set up these town camps, and they've like kind of got these rules in place that most people kind of abide by, and it's quite a peaceful time. And then these visitors come in without any of that background of how the camp runs, and just kind of like throw it up, like turn it over. And
Yep, a lot of the town camps are dry.
Yeah.
But then a lot of people coming bush will just ignore that, and they're coming to town. One of the attractions of town is alcohol. And so you can't get alcohol in town. Out bush, so you get it in town. Where do you drink? You go to the bottle shop, you've got to show your ID, you've got to list an address. You can't just say, I'm going to drink in the creek bed. They won't sell it to you. So you've got to list an address. I'm going to Hoppies, house 3. So off you go.
Yeah. And like some of the problems are around young boys, essentially. Like, and again, this is just from hearing conversations inside town camps, that people, wanting to have more bars on the community centre and more higher fences around the community centre. Cantor was one in particular, and that was based around the fact that they were just getting boys breaking in and just creating havoc, and those boys, were from other camps. They weren't local, whether or not that was true. But just, I don't know. I mean, for instance, when you've got a community centre and it's open, but some of these community centres have quite high security, and they're not, they're locked, and so who are they keeping out? Why are they locked? Why do they have tall fences? All of that sort of thing. Just as a discussion point, really.
Yeah.
Because these guys are trying to understand. I want them to understand. Because in my world, a community centre like a library, the ones that win awards, they want people to come inside all through the day. Sometimes all through the night as well.
Still off at night, though.
Well, they're reasonably open. I mean, I can walk in at any time and so on. But I'm just trying to get this sort of headspace, perhaps, where what do you think's going on there? Why are they so secure? And
I think it's a bit of the reality that a lot of these communities and families operate on a certain level of dysfunction, unfortunately. And so there are a lot of kids who are very bored. They're not going to school. They're not getting education, the same level of education, and there's levels of boredom in a country town, and so people just, I don't know, it's just boys.
Yeah, and I'm not
I'm
asking the question.
finding something to do, I don't know.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's difficult to know. I mean, I think, part of it is how often a town camp community center operates. Those that perhaps run more infrequently need to be locked more often, or idle. Nobody's looking out for them. Maybe more opportunity for that sort of thing to happen. Whether there's more crime in that sort of situation or not, I don't know. Compared to the town, would it be any different in town?
I never thought there was necessarily a lot of break-ins in those centres. Wasn't a big thing. There may have been the sense from community members to want to make sure that doesn't happen, but I never got the sense that there was a lot of actual vandalism or crime.
You'd think it would just be the same as any country town, that it's rural. Yeah. There's always that bracket of kind of young people running around at night doing stuff.
There's a lot of break-ins generally in Alice Springs.
Yeah.
I mean, most people have been broken into multiple times. It's not just town camps.
So, how there's a lease on the land for 40 years. How do you, once that lease is up, does this change what a camp is?
Isn't that soon? Isn't it?
No,
10 years ago.
No, 30 years to go.
25 years to go. 2008, I think.
2010.
2010.
10th of December. Hopefully the rules will get written before that's up. And there's a big push on at the moment.
What type of
rules? To get a sense of control back. In a lot of ways, there's layers of leases.
Yeah. Okay.
In a lot of ways, it's the Commonwealth. For the executive director of township leasing, the Commonwealth has a 40-year lease over the town camp. The town camp has a perpetual or 99-year lease over it. It's Crown land. So the Crown land then sort of just took it. Do they really own it? Probably not. The traditional owners, there's multiple layers of these kind of leases, and it gets quite complicated. I think the main question is what you can do and your ability to sort of operate it freely and how you want. And I think people get that. I think the leases become less relevant. There's a big push at the moment around, there's a local decision-making agreement with Tunganjira Council and the Northern Territory Government to try to reverse some of the negative impacts of the Northern Territory intervention over the last 10 years since Howard sort of basically eradicated community input, and to try and take control of the management of housing back under a community housing model to actually decide their own rules. I think if that can get achieved, because the Northern Territory government, they're not actually that interested in these spaces. I don't actually think the Commonwealth is either. They don't, it's a headache for them. But at a certain political time, that just coincided and they were told they had to do it. But they're looking for an out.
Would ideally the people who live on the land eventually own the land that they live on?
Well, I actually think from that was one of the greatest things when I was working in the housing department there, was you go out and you sit down with people and you say, okay, we've got some housing allocations, some rules, and you own this land, because they did in that sense. That was one of the strengths of Tunganjira as a grassroots organisation. Every tenant effectively owned that. They owned that entire town camp communally. So they would be listed every AGM. You'd say, who are the new people here? Sign you up for membership. You're now officially a member of Charles Creek Housing Association. We send you off to the government books. You're a member. You own this now. It's yours. And so that was its strength. They paid rent, but they paid rent to themselves communally, to their own. They controlled their rent bucket. And hopefully at one point it'll come back to that, because once they have their grassroots ownership, and people really had a sense of ownership communally, very different ownership than we're used to having. It's not a private ownership. And every now and then you hear people talking about wanting to have a private ownership of a house. I want to buy my house. You're not really buying a house, because they have no value You know, you can't really ever sell it, and you know they'd be kind of worthless. But they're really just trying to buy the control to get the government out of the road. If you can have ownership of that space communally, that's their strength. That's where it came from, and it's pretty empowering for people. And then they can then communally decide the rules, what we do.
And if there was like people who wanted to live in that community and not just live with their family, or like try to get their own space, like how does that process work?
Like outsiders, what do you mean? Or
like, I suppose if it's your family, like, and your, I don't know, your aunties and uncles are living there, and your mum and dad, but you want your own house. Like, maybe that's really Western perception, but like.
Yeah, I mean, you just put your name. You would sort of, you'd know each family probably has a grouping of houses. There'd be top camp, bottom camp, middle camp. Some other camp. You know, section within a town camp. And so it's kind of known unofficially. And that's what people didn't want to give up as well. They wanted to be able to say, look, that's my house now. I've taken it over from my sister. She's given that to me.
Yeah.
That's the issue. Governments don't like that sort of stuff, and sometimes for good reason. But people would basically, now it's a bit more formalised. There's housing allocation lists, and yet you want a house, you put your name on the waiting list, like any community housing, public housing authority, and you've got to be filtered. And in an ideal circumstance, when a house comes up, a vacant, the association together would review the allocation list and make a decision. When that happens now, they make a recommendation. You know, Betsy over here, we're going to give it to her for all sorts of myriad of reasons.
Because like I've been looking, like looking at Whitebridge, and I was reading
Whitegate.
Oh. And I was like reading an article.
I'm doing it as well.
And that's a different circumstance one there.
But I was reading an article that because they don't have the facilities there, like their children don't come and visit them because the kids can't wash, and so then the family sort of split up. And I suppose that happens quite often if there's not like a permanence in.
But that one's also in contention for who owns the land there, right? Is that?
It's never had a lease.
Yeah, because it's Crown land.
Yeah, unlike
it never
others,
signed up, didn't it? And
it was never given.
so there were a
one.
loose relationship with. Sorry, go. Yeah.
It was never offered one. It was never obtained.
And why wasn't it offered one?
I'm guessing that they shut the gate on those claims at some point. You know,
that's it.
Most of the town camps were successful in getting across the line with a lease claim, and I think at some point.
Tangier Design, one of its main purposes of being set up, where Andrew ran, was to actually organise leases. That was its first function. People want houses. Well, you can't have a house until you have title for land. Okay, well, we need to get a lease. Okay, that was one of their main focus at my understanding. Yeah, I think that's right. It just suddenly.
So there was a couple of those. That was one. There's one called Namatjira, which was near trucking yards, and that's now been. It's gone. Eradicated.
No, it was across the road, wasn't it? It's across the road.
Just
from
between,
right on the railway line.
Trucking yards, just next to.
Did that this
more
gradually just people moved away?
There's a dedicated push by government to move people out.
Because that'll also sort of happen.
Yeah.
People are still at White.
It's stronger out there. Yeah, they're a pretty strong group because they don't have much. And they used to just have a water supply, and I imagine they still do, that ran from Ilpi camp. And every kind of 3 weeks we would have to send a housing person up to walk the line to sort of get a bit of tape and tape up the hole, and there's another one. It's a crappy old water line that's ran across the rocks, so you just couldn't dig it in. And then,
And is it because they're not signed up to the lease, they don't get all of the kind of government money?
No infrastructure.
No support at all.
Governments are fixated on, leases. We won't give money unless you have land.
But Tangier does look after them in some way as well.
Yeah. Tangier doesn't follow those rules, so.
We had a little guerrilla activity once out there. We, in fact, it was under project with Paul when we were doing the heat mitigation work, putting cladding on houses and little shades over windows and the like, and some outdoor shelters, sun shades. And we built, you're not allowed to build on ungazetted land, I suppose. But we put a shelter up at White Dude, sort of under that program, but under the radar at some point. So.
Yeah, and Tungagira kind of just tries to just do things. I mean, that's the great and empowering thing about working for a non-government organisation like that. And then you go to work elsewhere, like you can just sort of, yep, there's the people you're working for. I don't care what government says. They want it, we'll find a way. We'll get a bit of money here, get a bit of money there, and we'll just do it. We put washing machines definitely at Whitegate, It wasn't their money, but we just scraped it off another program, called it something else, and just got it done. But they don't have much. They've got a few pit toilets, some taps, a few tin sheds, But
and those are the type of places where the stuff that you guys are doing, like those small things, we're putting the right taps in and doing all that stuff, where that's really important. Because it can it's not about building something or adding another structure. It's just about keeping those facilities like what they've got working, because it's
amenities, really. Yeah. What is a house? For a lot of people, a house is just a place where you can have a shower and go to the toilet. It's not the rooms, not the roof. Yeah. it's a bunch of amenities. Yeah. Is what a house is. A service. Housing is a verb.
And when you look at all this housing stock that's currently there, do you think that more of that type of stock is needed to house more people, or do you think that the house needs to change to be able to deal with those influxes, whether it's more people or services?
Look, it's probably a combination of both too few houses and housing design that could be more sensitive to people's conditions and what they're interested in and how they live their lives. Housing, the kind of proud history of Tungagira design was the design of a number of kind of bespoke houses that could be altered and changed over time, and were quite adaptable, culturally responsive spaces. But over time, the way houses are delivered today is a kind of cookie cutter. This is it, 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, and that's what it looks like, and sort of roll them out. And they may or may not be responsive to particular groups, families' needs, and the like. So it would certainly be a combination of those.
When you showed your little model there, where you were playing with like the rooms and the prices and stuff, is that a similar? Is that what you were doing?
That's a kind of consultation technique where you say, look, there's a housing program in town, and you're up for a house, and here are the sort of possibilities for numbers of bedrooms, kitchens, bathrooms, living areas, etc. Here are a range of possible layouts. This is roughly what things cost. So if you want an extra bedroom, well, that's how much that's going to cost. Something else has to drop off. Just giving enough information so people can make informed decisions about, about their house, what it's made of, what the design is, and that sort of thing. So that's that kind of technique in a sense. Visually.
And at a community level, isn't it?
And
certainly because how the observation lines that you go into a town camp, you won't necessarily pick up on it, but the sight lines across are absolutely critical. What you can see from your front window or front veranda. You go communities up in the top end. There's all sorts of cultural avoidance relationships where brothers, sisters, certain skin groups can't actually be in the same house at the same time. So if someone's coming up the drive, you've got to have a clear observation of them coming up the driveway or coming up the street, and you've got to then have a way to get out of your house so that you aren't actually in the same room at the same time. That could have serious consequences. That's not the case in the centre, but there's other things, there's other influences, so when Andrew would do that, you would also then have a camp or community wide, and here's the orientation of the house is critical. One aspect is, as architects we're taught, is orientating for passive design, right? Absolutely fundamental. But there's other social things that may influence how you orientate your house, who you're looking at. and who you're not looking at, who your back's to.
Is that why some arrangements of the houses are really sort of off angle, or?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
so-
people are given a choice on those town camps. How do you want it? It's clear it's not government going bomb bomb. I mean, I'm sure some of the new site here probably is. I haven't seen
A bit more of an address to the street, I suppose. But yeah, it's not based on that.
Sorry,
Yeah.
what was that?
I said, yeah, there's the if you look at, you've seen the sort of town camp plans, the houses are sort of, they look like they're kind of nonsensical in the sense of the way they're arranged, but they'd all be in many ways responding to the things that David's talking about, unless the kind of more typical suburban development where you have an address on the street, it faces the street, it's parallel with the street line or something.
The roads came later.
Yeah.
The houses came first. It was just dirt tracks you go everywhere. Then there came the need to formalise it because dust isn't great for your eye infections, all sorts of reasons, controlling cars so kids don't get run over. There came a need to sort of control the flow of traffic through camps. It's really important safety issue and health issue. Bitumising roads is really important, controlling stormwater overflow. All these things sort of came on after. We did a whole project, I don't know how they fared in the end, but it was looking at a stormwater management. So I am going a little tangent now.
Is that sort of your experience with Hidden Valley? Because it seems pretty...
Oh, that was a big engineer job, wasn't it? That stormwater, that was an engineer's attempt at stormwater. Is that what you're talking about?
No, but
Oh, okay.
just fall into it, I guess. But what's your experience with... Because it seems quite built up, Hidden Valley, compared to the other town camps. Just as a broad sort of question, what was your experience with that town camp? If you were involved with it? Just to get an idea.
Well, there were 2 camps under the site. There was this $100 million I was mentioning. There were 85 new houses that came with that, and they tended to, most of them went on 2 of the town camps that were bigger, Hidden Valley and Larapinta. And so there's a bit of a government push to build a lot of houses there, whether the people really wanted it or not, to be honest.
And that's where most of the infrastructure dollars went as well. So roads, curbs, gutters, things like that. Trucking yards got quite a bit, but those 2 camps were got a lot of that stuff. And part of this was also this kind of push to get town council, Alice Springs Town Council, to pick up the rubbish, become part of the regular group. But town council continually refused to go into town camps and pick up rubbish because the roads weren't wide enough for the rubbish trucks, and they didn't have the turning circles. So they went to some effort in some of these town camps to try to create a situation, a condition in which that might be more likely. I mean, in the end, they still refused for whatever reasons, but a lot of that infrastructure was under that sort of housing program, which worked at varying levels. I mean, I remember it was Larapinta, I think, where the authorities decided in their wisdom to cut down this beautiful row of corkwoods because they insisted their power lines had to go on that side of the street rather than on the other side of the street where there were no corkwoods. So these kind of crazy decisions around infrastructure and the things that sort of drove them were just mad, really. But yeah, those Hidden Valley, Larapinta particularly, are heavy on curbs and gutters and things like that, which is good for stormwater management.
We did a great project, but I was just starting to tell about a stormwater management plan across. It followed on the work by a guy called Mike Last, who did a lot of work out at People River in the early days. And we got all these semi-trail loads of fill from different building sites, and we just got it, instead of going to the dump, we just got them trucked in, and we just build these massive big mounds to trap all the stormwater flow. There's not much rainwater in Alice. And so part of it was to promote vegetation mainly and habitable spaces in those communal areas, so that they could grow trees naturally. They're not going to die. They don't need to be watered. And like a traditional sand dune, if you go out to the Simpson Desert ever, you go along, it's pretty flat and goes up the sand dune, and down the bottom there's just ever slightly dip, and that's where you get a little bit of vegetation, a little bit of dew, a little bit of moisture just gathers in the base of that dune. That was the same principle. So we just did a whole lot of mapping, across the communities. We did a range of them, Carter, Walpurgis, a little bit of Truckies, and just sort of shaping the earth. We had big teams of people that were big graders pushing it around. It was kind of fun, just shaping these shapes and then planting little plants in amongst the base of these and then promoting the growth to sort of grow. I think some of them work, some of them die, but you know, it's sort of, and also to help stop the flow of traffic. So it's not just this free-for-all cars just going wherever they want, to try and control those spaces so they're habitable. So I think those communal spaces, how you deal with them, there's a number of ways. They don't all just need big green painted rocks to stop cars.
Yeah. It seems to be the solution that they talk about.
That's a quick job. Bring in some rocks,
Yeah.
paint them.
Paint them.
It's always a
Always
work
painted.
for the Dole project.
Yeah.
But shaping the earth is a nice way to think about, you know, if anyone's working on that part of town camps, to sort of to do that, to promote growth and create habitable communal spaces. We used to plant a lot of fruit trees and mulberry trees and things in them as well, so kids could, you know, there could be access to fruit. You know, if prolonged drought, they're going to die, right? But otherwise, if they can survive, you know, substantial mulberry trees in Alice Springs, you don't need to water them. So they're just naturally going to get just a little bit more moisture because they're at the, you've created a little pond, you know, basin for them, and they've got more chance of living, more shade, a bit of vitamin C. Yeah.
I was also wondering, like, how initially, like the camps, initially people were literally camping on the land, and then it sort of built up into sort of more shacks and then into formalised houses. Like, that's right?
Yep.
Like,
Started with humpies,
Yeah.
tents, bits of canvas.
yeah. And then how did the town, like the spaces of the town camps, boundaries, be like set? Like, how did they become a formalised town camp?
Well, I believe it was sort of people were camping this area. That exact line might have been determined about what maybe was on the other side of the line. Maybe it's fairly arbitrary. I don't have a clear answer to that. Only I know there was a process of people trying to draw up boundaries. It's pretty clear when people were camping in the middle of a town and then the town came into it, they just drew around. It's probably more related, I'd imagine, to what was on the other side. There was probably already a lease of land here. You know, Little Sisters, for example, there's, you know, the Little Sisters, whatever that was.
Police station there.
And the nunnery or something.
Nunnery, yeah.
There, and on the other side there was the night carts, you know, where they bring out all the shit cans from the toilets in town. You know, like all the toilets in town, you know, they just have a little can, everyone shits in the can and it goes on a trolley and they bring it out, or they dump it just out near Little Sisters. They're all just sitting there, and that would have been a boundary of some site. And then there's the rubbish tip on the other side, so that was its natural boundary. I think they're a similar. Or hills, often. Hidden Valley, it's just big hill. Old timers, big hills. They're probably sacred sites, most of those hills. I mean, there are a number of sacred sites through camps, and even though they mightn't be the traditional owners living on that camp, they would absolutely respect it. They're not going to go and chop that big tree down, or take into that hill if it's a sacred site.
Is it into working with Tangentyere, and then so Tangentyere is separate to Alice Springs Council, right? They're like separate things.
Yeah.
So, and then is there often lots of decisions made by Alice Springs Council that don't take into consideration what like Tangentyere's opinion of things, or like the traditional owners? So say where highways are put or where things that go through, because I know that there was a big highway put through during timing of the Caterpillar story and things like that. Do you think that in Alice Springs, because it's such a large indigenous population, should it just be that everything that's like decision should be in line with Tangentyere and have a like process that's through that? Because it just seems like it's so important. And do you think that Tangentyere is like a much better way of dealing with country and council? That's a loaded question.
There's certainly a lot in your question. I mean, I think.
Sorry, I said a bit of rant.
Yeah, I mean, Tonga Council, I think David mentioned earlier, is the town campers themselves aren't the traditional owners in Alice Springs,
Yeah.
typically. There's a group called Laratipa, which is the sort of prescribed body corporate. It's made up of a number of groups that are the traditional owners of Alice Springs. So with respect to any work that happens around Alice Springs, traditional owners typically have to be consulted about that stuff. The example you raised about the cutting off of the caterpillar's tail near the casino golf course area is an absolute travesty, and that's something that didn't happen, or it did happen, but somebody decided to bring the bulldozers out for whatever reason. So that consultation obviously has to happen with regard to broad issues. Anything that happens in town camps, ideally, there's conversations that happen with the Tonga Council, so that's their domain, the town camps themselves, but not everything else outside in Alice Springs. So there's kind of two things in your question. But yeah, that conversation about what happens on people's land is essential.
I mean, they have the right, they're a defined boundary, so the council can't just now come to the road unless they acquire it, but they're a local council, they're not a Commonwealth or a state. They don't have that authority. They may have desires, they see these big parcels of land and the council survive by development dollars, so they may want to say that should all get developed, but it's kind of something, well, I just don't want it, it's not your land. So
do they run very differently? Because Alice Springs Council quite typical, like say the same as Newcastle Council or like
So
Council,
roads,
yeah.
rubbish.
So just that kind of stuff. But then danger is more like a tangible
housing,
service
social
provider.
services, less housing now because the government funds housing, but at some point they'll get housing back. But yeah, services largely.
Youth services, night patrol services, all sorts of aged care. Housing was sort of one of the reasons that it's set up to both get the land title and then get houses built. That was one of the core reasons for being. Yeah, but town council, there's always been this sort of unhappy relationship really, and it sort of worked, generally hasn't, with town council and Tonga. Whereas, as I mentioned earlier, town council is really there to look after kind of landowner interests, ratepayers. Basically, you don't pay rates, we don't really care about you. It's like the same, when they struggle to pick up rubbish, like we're just in town, we're all part of the same community, right? But they said, no, look, we pick up everyone's wheelie bin at their boundary of their property. We come down Smith Street and pick up number 3 Smith Street. We go over there, well, there's your town camp. Okay, there might be 100 houses in there, but that's for their eyes, they're not individual lots. It's one lot of land. We'll pick up your bin. You just got to wheel them all to the front gate, and we'll do it then. No problems. But that's not going to happen. Same with postal services,
and bus services. We looked at that at Carnta Camp. The bus doesn't come into the town camp out on the highway. Which is a trek. So yeah, same postal service, bus service. Rubbish, all that sort of stuff.
Do you think it's just quite a political thing rather than like practicality?
It's underlying racism, essentially.
Yeah, for sure.
That's who. I mean, town councils. Alice Town Council is inherently racist. How it was established, who it was looking after. I mean, that history of dispossession is not very old. Where I lived. Wingalina for a little while, right on the WA, Northern Territory, South Australia border. And there's this old man who lived in our front yard. He spoke no English. He lived first contact. A lot of people out traditionally he grew up and remember as a kid the very first time any of his family saw white people. That 1788 is more like kind of, I don't know, not 1938, but pretty recent. Remote communities, Alice less so, but not that far behind. It's just a staggered history. And the same inherent racism that underpins kind of white Australia now is alive and well in Alice Springs right now. It's just, got a good 100-year time lag on it, unfortunately.
because the systems that generate property, like around here, if someone's going to set up a new town camp, a new suburb, the government will say, okay, they'll zone a piece of land, they'll say, okay, we're going to sell that, and then the developer will buy it for many millions of dollars, and then they'll actually pay for all of the sewerage and services to go in, and then they'll sell the pieces of land, won't they? And then someone buys that piece of land, and then as soon as you buy the piece of land, you're then going to pay rates, which then pays for libraries and garbage to be picked up. And that's how the system works, isn't it? You know, like in a nutshell. But the situation in the town camps is not like that, is it?
Not playing by the rule book.
Yeah. So the interesting, well, the dilemma, interesting thing, the dilemma with that is that the people the electricity's been connected and the houses have been built, but the people who live in them can't really sell them. So it's not really like you'd describe it as an asset. You know, it's not something that's saleable. And the people who live there don't pay rent. You know, so it's going to rely on money coming in, isn't it, from government
rent,
to.
did you say?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'm asking that question.
Oh, yeah.
Oh no, they don't pay rates. Sorry.
Rates.
Yeah, they don't pay rates to.
Actually, no.
I mean, these are open. You know, these are questions. But I suppose the model for the town camp is going to rely on some income coming in to maintain and so on. Because the other role of Taninjira is to apply for grants. You know, to apply for funding from the government, Northern Territory and federal government, such that they can then roll out these services, isn't it? Because they don't have a big bank, they don't have a big.
Yeah, well, they're funded for providing municipal services.
Yeah.
You know, rubbish removal.
Yeah. So it's just, I mean, the model. You know, putting the whole thing that the people who are living there have been dispossessed and all of that, and the racism obviously that's involved in that. But it is. Going forward, it is going to rely on some form of government funding, isn't it, to keep going? It's a question. It's not a statement.
Disenfranchised, social housing. You know, you look at youth accommodation, youth housing. You know, there's all sorts of social housing. Some can be almost self-reliant. You know, public community houses for key workers and people who work in. You can get market rents. Any kind of housing in communities where there's very low employment. Is kind of the high end of the services needed and the most costly to maintain.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's no way that they could be self-sufficient without government support.
Mm. So do you agree? Like this? Like
yeah, no, I agree.
Yes. But
that happens everywhere. That happens in all communities. You know, that government support. That's the role of government. Just to sort of and it's not saying they need all the government money. You know, they actually had more money to spend back before now, 10, 12 years ago, when they collected all their own rent and controlled their own rent. Mm-hmm. They had up to about $8,500 to spend on maintenance every year for every house.
Yep.
The government now spend $5,000 per house.
Okay, just opening that up. So the people who live in the houses, they do pay rent?
Yep.
And they pay rent to Taninjira?
No, now it's government, because the government took
Because the government is the leaseholder.
Through the 40-year lease, they took over.
Okay, so they pay, and, you know, I mean, are they paying $100 a week, or are they paying $50 or $200, or, just as a
it's very similar to normal public housing. Usually it's a
30% of what you can afford.
Proportion of your income up to a cap.
Yeah. Okay, so there is some flow, thank God, back to the government, because the government does need as much money as it can get.
Yeah.
So that goes back to the government, and so that's the income that the government has, and then their expenses are probably a little bit more than the incomes that they receive.
Yeah.
Would that be right? Yeah.
But it's all just like systemic issues. Like getting your bin collected should just be part of that human right of being able to live and pay rent, and it should just be integrated into everything.
Well, children don't pay rents. Parents pay rents, but children still use libraries and get in cars and go on roads, don't they? So, I'm not making the link between children and indigenous, but I'm saying that we often have built into our social systems people who don't ordinarily pay for them but do receive the benefit.
I mean, this kind of gets back to some of the earlier questions that you were asking, kind of the bigger questions. You know, what's the future and what does it look like? And, in some ways, the the bigger questions, the systemic issues, those are things that, that's a lifelong struggle. But how about getting that bin sorted out? I mean, that's where you can kind of
doable.
focus
Yeah.
some attention.
You can actually
and that
achieve.
makes huge amount of difference, just to get the bin sorted out, would be an amazing thing. So you don't have to figure out how to unpack the world with everything you do. Yes, if you began to unpack it, you would see how far back bin delivery goes into the system, and you would say, well, I can't work with that. That's just going to be too friggin' hard. I'm just gonna see if I can just get a bin to that house and emptied. That's all I want to do.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is much more kind of manageable in a sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't mean you don't ask those questions and make those observations and try to interrogate, what's this kind of source of all this stuff. But yeah, how far and what kind of level of paralysis does that analysis kind of create in a sense?
Yeah, it's a lot to do with the equality between the two areas. Like, if these people in town are getting all of these services, then why aren't these people?
Exactly.
It's just it's about.
And
the balance between
thankfully,
the
there
two.
are people who are arguing. Tongues Your Council is a great advocate to argue, toss on some of these issues, and thankfully, there are people who are well qualified to do that. You can figure out how to get that bin sorted out. That's the important thing. So.
Yeah.
I mean, these debates the whole stuff about fringe camps, which is essentially what these started, they're everywhere. They're everywhere in New South Wales.
They're all over the world, everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, part of the Housing for Health projects we do here, we go to a town, and you'll get Aboriginal housing owned by the Land Council in town, and then you'll get the little discrete community that was previously the mission. Probably before that, it was just a fringe camp. Although there were fringe camps on around, through the Great Depression spread around towns, but a lot of them were just Aboriginal people coming in as well. There's fringe dwellers, and that's essentially what the history of these are.
Yeah. So you might say that what a town camp might look like in 20 years or 50 years is heavily reliant on the kind of funding at one level that it might receive, and how the people who are living there see where they want to live. I'm just it's an open question
How
again.
empowered they are to actually make their own decisions will be a massive determinant about what camps will look like.
The actual individual people who are living in
the
those
individuals
houses.
and the community as a
And
whole,
the
they're
community.
empowered to actually decide their own outcomes.
Yeah.
Then that will very different to if government
And
to come in
if they were
decide
to
for them.
if they were to receive the funding and do that, do you think that they would look any different in 20 years if they received that?
You'd have to know what the people want, wouldn't you? Though?
Yeah.
Like,
I know, but these guys know what the
Yeah.
people like. This is why I'm drilling down on these points. Or they know more than the others in the room. So, which is a hard question, you see. This is why the pause.
I think a lot of what's historically there has come out of a good process.
Yes.
There's been periods of where a government, and we're sort of still in the throes, probably the worst period in their history right now, of where government has basically just shoved people to the side in that decision-making process. I mean, a statement of the problem. So we understand what that might be. But what might be if we imagine into that space, knowing. It's like any sort of situation that if I know this much about it, I don't know actually what the future will be, but I can, knowing what I know about this, I can think, oh, well, maybe it'll look like that. It doesn't mean that it will be that, but I'm just sort of wondering what you
you individually think that might be? And I realise it's a hard question. I've asked it maybe 5 or 6 times, but I'm sort of interested in that. But just before you answer, the reason why I'm interested in that is because I think it's really hard to if you don't know something, it's really hard to understand something unless you know where it might be heading. And most things are like that. So for people in the room that haven't been to Alice Springs and that they don't really have that, I think it's a really important vision. But it doesn't have to be correct. It doesn't have to be, it's just sort of a thing. So this is the reason for it.
I think a progressive outlook and a positive outlook is always a healthy one. It's always a good one to have. But I think it goes back to that, how much of this do you bite off? And I think we can imagine a future where bins can be delivered and emptied. That's an imaginable future. Does that go with, some other nirvana? I'm not sure. And maybe that's not, it's difficult to kind of know what that might be. But perhaps it's these series of pieces that we can think about a positive future for, whether it's a bus stop, a simple bus stop in a community where you get the bus to come in and pick people up and take them into town. How hard could that be? It's immensely hard. How hard could it be to deliver a bin? So, if you can sort of imagine these moments, I suppose, in a place where that could change, where something simple like that could happen, then you can imagine a better future.
But then why if I was asked that about my community, or if I asked you about where you live, you wouldn't say that. You would say, well, it would be more, it would be a grander vision. But why is it difficult to draw a vision out of these places?
Well,
beyond the bins.
Fundamentally, it's not my vision. It can't be our vision for these.
I know that.
Somebody else's vision. So I can't really say what is. It doesn't matter in some ways what my vision is, except to say that one would hope for a positive future for everyone, particularly people who are perhaps not the usual way of doing things. I don't know what those are. They're always evolving. It's always going to differ depending on where you are and who you're talking to. But listening quietly, not wanting to fill the silences, in your conversations. You'll go out for the first time, sit down with town campers to talk about whatever the project might be. Don't go in there sort of saying this is what it's all about. Here's some great ideas, because what you'll get is agreement that sounds great. Let's go off and do that. But that's not necessarily what people are after. And so the communication's about really listening kind of deeply to what people are interested in, what their lives are about, what they're after. And really, it's a discipline to kind of hold your own thinking back, in a sense, your own way of approaching things. And that's the sort of avoidance, I suppose, in the questions that you're asking.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm asking it too.
It's sort of, maybe after a period of time spent in Alice Springs and working in places, you become less drawn to the idea of solving problems and simply than you are in kind of listening and addressing issues in some way. I don't know, it's a kind of subtle sort of distinction.
I think maybe my understanding for a lot of people to sort of cross over those two, people have some sort of aspirational kind of wish to essentially live a bit of a semi kind of, have it both ways in a way. You gotta have a house that essentially looks like a house, doesn't look like a 1970s sort of igloo with some 1970s architect desire of what they think Aboriginal people want. They want the house, the white picket fence. What's inside the house and how it works might actually be quite different. But visually, people want the house to look like a house, essentially the camps and the communities and how they live are still, people want be able to have the flexibility of a fairly traditional lifestyle. So it's a bit of both ways.
Yeah.
To be able to actually have on that whole side there, I remember old Little Sisters from one time, there was 80 people, 100 people just lived there for about 3 years down on the edge of Berwick, just in tents and humpies. And they were just totally, Yeah, of course they live there.
Yeah.
Not part of the house. They're not paying rent, but they're just living there.
Yeah.
And that's, that's okay. That's people want to have that flexibility. Or your young teenager grow up, you want a room to go in and sort of watch TV and smoke your bongs inside your house and just sort of sleep all day. I mean, maybe not great aspirations, but that's that people want it both ways, and you get everything. But that's no different to remote communities.
Yeah. Is the process that we procure buildings a problem? And by that I mean that funding appears, someone wants a house, yes, you go through a process, whatever that looks like, and then the house appears and someone moves in. Is it to rethink that, where perhaps you don't build the whole house? What you build first is something which is a third of what might be the whole house, and then it gets added to as you go through or something. Is there, and I very purposely put up this sort of diagram, in that is the way that we work in a very linear way part of the problem. So for instance, in this house, perhaps in those communities, perhaps you build a much smaller house and then realise that other rooms need to be added or something, and then there's some process where that's done or something. And it's just a question, it's not a... But I'm just sort of thinking, is it beyond the object and into the process here a little bit, the way that architecture is actually rolled out, little a and big A?
I know there was a lot of sort of push from community at one stage for how, these started as camps, right? As sort of talked about as just camping. So if you imagine yourself just going down somewhere and camping, how would you live? How close would you be to others? Who are you looking at? It's the exact same process. And then where the brick walls came are kind of they're just like a bit of a tent, really. They're just a bit of shelter. That's a bit incidental. Essentially, if you pare it back, where all these camps are, houses are together, they're like groups of humpies over here, another group of humpies over there. That's how they're all kind of sort of all over the place. They've evolved from where people have chosen to sit down and actually sleep. No, I'm going to sleep here, and they've maybe put up started with a humpy, put up a few tin sheds, evolved on to sort of get a bit of a room. Now we need a bathroom. We don't want to use that communal pit toilet over there, so we'll get a bathroom added on, or we'll get that demolished and a newer one. But essentially, it's the same, but just it's a layering of a camp, original physical camp, just swag on the ground, a few branches and a few bits of corrugated iron. That's
because the system of architecture more broadly throughout most of the world, certainly around where we are, is very much based on going through a very intense regulatory process where fantastic images of buildings with lots of people and balloons are shown to people, which they all approve of, and then we build things and then everyone just thinks, oh my God, I can't believe that they've built that. There seems to be this great problem between what seemingly quite an intense and well thought out process when you're looking at it objectively. It takes years to do something and many people to get to this point, and then it creates something that we then see and think, oh my God, I can't believe that was such a mistake, And that seems to be culturally what we have in architecture, actually, or what I believe that we've got. And I just think that it's perhaps is there some element of that going on here? Is there something that we could look at the way that perhaps just discussing about the way that they make buildings that could maybe come back the other way? Perhaps it's us that have got it all wrong, and that maybe these processes of slowly building things and finding out where the best bit of earth might be to live and all that kind of thing. Maybe that's where we should be. And again, it's just a comment to.
It's certainly a good observation, particularly on the delivery of Aboriginal housing, the way way it's typically delivered, under emergency circumstances or perceived emergency circumstances. Things have to be rolled out quickly, and ministers are wanting to sort of, show that they've delivered a number of X number of bedrooms within a certain period of time. So there are all kinds of things that kind of surround an Aboriginal housing program that a government might roll out, which is automatically going to create problems in terms of what the final product is, that gap between what the aspiration is, which is, let's build 100 more houses and 300 more bedrooms, whatever, and solve the crowding problem. And the actual delivery of that, becomes a problem. I mean, the whole SciHID program, which rolled through town, a number of years ago, was, very quick, cookie cutter. We were talking about housing design earlier. Cookie cutter sort of rollout of houses that didn't really deliver anything except extra bedrooms, in a sense. Didn't deliver any economic opportunities for Aboriginal people, whether in construction trades or any sort of allied services that might surround a construction project. Didn't contribute in any substantial way to addressing people's aspirations for particular house types or designs or layouts or locations or any of that stuff. It was just push it out quickly. So there's certain procurement models which are just an absolute disaster. They do everything you wouldn't want them to do, and they're the kind of worst models on steroids, in a sense. So yes, I mean, procurement's certainly a big part of it when you're talking about large housing delivery programs. So you'd have to ask the question: well, maybe housing is delivered really smaller scale, by local, in a very localized sort of way. I mean, the whole SciHID model is alliance contracting, lots of contractors and developers and people who come in, spend a year or two in Alice Springs, push through housing, engineers and planners and people who have no idea about any of the stuff we've been talking about today, just kind of charging through. There were a few, fellow travelers on the team who were trying to fight the good fight, and get some good things happening in terms of design and layout. But ultimately, they're crushed by time and money and all sorts of things. So, yeah, procurement's a huge issue. It's an enormous issue. How architecture is done, how buildings are delivered.
Is that, you brought up the document before from the government architects, and I forgot the name of it, but something
Connected with Country.
Connected with Country. Does that look at any of those issues?
It's a kind of broader. It's kind of a big picture sort of approach to thinking about architecture and urban design.
You don't think this is big picture?
Well, sorry, it doesn't get down into the detail of a house as such. It's more about how you think about projects in a kind of broader context.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could. Probably,
no, but does it think
wouldn't take much to kind of think about how you bring it down.
But not just in the house, just in terms of the way we procure buildings, because the buildings I've got in mind that go through this process of many years are down at Honeysuckle, the apartment buildings and so on. So they're not small buildings; they're big buildings. But they've been through this process of approval, many, and then they're built and they're awful, and they don't seem to work.
So that document would
does that document
to address that kind of issue? I think that's what it's designed to do, is to try to change the way big multi-res or mixed-use developments are done.
Kind of working.
That are more aware of and sensitive to country and inclusion and the whole range of issues that are typically left out inside. So that would definitely begin to do that. And developers now have to front design review panels and defend that sort of work according to the guidelines that are in the Connecting with Country framework. So it's not mandated yet. It's out for a year, sort of testing and comment, and then it's and then the idea is probably in the next couple of years it'll become a mandated piece of work that any goes through the planning gateway, as they say. It becomes part of the way of doing business. Yeah. So it's quite a progressive, very very forward-thinking, unusual document that I think will have a huge impact on the industry. And architects, big architects, little architects, everyone in the industry is just starting to twig to it and think, okay, well, how do I do this? What am I going to do? How do I make this happen? And so there are things there that I think could certainly inform the work that you guys are doing. Yeah, it's quite a good document. Yeah, some good case studies in there, and a lot of which help inform your thinking. Yeah. But, and even just in terms of process, they have this way of thinking about the project life cycle. Instead of talking about concept design, the term imagining. Which just using a kind of slightly different language, instead of design development, it's sort of shaping, instead of sort of post-occupancy operation, it's caring for the country, so it's kind of a completely different mindset for how you begin to think about the project life cycle, getting away from sort of conventional notions of how we think about projects in this business as usual model, thinking more about the sort of model on the right. So I think it would be quite useful to look at as a kind of guideline for that.
Particularly if, and I imagine through time we get to a point where we can modify buildings as well. I'm thinking that the people at Honeysuckle are probably racing through to get their buildings up before documents like this can interfere with them. But then once they're built, they're still open to different ways of being viewed and adapted and so on. So we've discussed a bit of Canter Camp, and I think a little bit of Hidden Valley, and a bit of Whitegate. We also have Anduppa, and we have Hoppies as well as being. Is there anyone here who's doing Hoppies? No, the Hoppies people aren't here. Oh. Sorry, someone on Zoom is doing Hoppies. Okay. Just in terms of, we might keep you for like 10 more minutes, if that's okay. It's now 4:30.
Well, still
I asked to do Hoppies, but I'm not sure. Do we know?
Yeah, I sent an email out. Yeah. Yeah.
I actually think you are.
Maybe you are in Hoppies.
Okay. Cool.
No, I was going to ask anything kind of
specific.
Yeah, kind of. But
Hoppies is a tricky place.
Okay. Oh no.
Challenging.
Good. Challenging. Okay.
Mainly, their main issues are they're right on the edge of they're right on the river, so they got a lot of people camping right on their boundaries. They wanted a massive big fence at one point, and they got the bottle shop straight across there. I know I keep talking about bottle shops, but they can be an influence for a lot of people coming from downtown. Now they may have done some, I think they've done a bit of work around that, but huge influence on that community. Just the people, the inability to sort of control their space. The bombshell of the community centre. I don't know if that's still a bombshell. Still there?
No, that was one that got some attention a few years ago.
Yeah.
It's still there. Yes, I assume it's still operating. Yeah, that was this is sorry, not at Hoppies, but down in Kunow. Yeah, so they were starting to use that. The one at Hoppies is called.
because a lot of Anna from Tangiera has gone out to the different camps and then made comments back into, there's some recurring themes and things I've heard of, and I'm sure that you have heard of as well, around informal roads, for instance. Like there's issues that just seem to keep coming up.
Vehicle, but also just pedestrian pathways through communities. Through a camp and also within a camp.
Yeah.
They're really important to recognise, and it's really hard for you guys. You're not going there, right? It's to sort of understand and get an appreciation of it. I guess you can just sort of try and guesstimate it, but it's you probably see the aerial little footmarks.
Yeah,
I guess.
I mean we've got some pretty good aerial photography, but also Google Street Map has been in
Have they
the
gone
town
in?
camps.
Yeah, okay.
And so you can actually zoom in. So it's not so bad. But essentially what we're talking about is generally in the town camps the roads are asphalt generally, and then on the sides of that there'll be little roads sometimes that come off, and that's people. Are they residents who are making those roads, or are they? I mean, these informal roads, the ones that spiral out. We're talking about hoppies, the one at the end that goes out to Third Highway and so on. Who makes them? And of course the communities are wanting to stop them because they have children and they don't want cars zooming by on things that aren't roads, near their houses, which makes sense, of course.
They're just informal roads and.
Do you know who makes them? And are those residents or are they just visitors?
They're just the first car goes over it, then the next car.
No, but who's driving that car? That's right.
Yeah, difficult to know. I mean, obviously you talk to town camp presidents, and leaders, and there'd be a sense that other people are making those incursions, and that they don't like them. I mean, there was that one at Hoppies, which was that gateway from north of town through Hoppies and Kinoff and through the bush to avoid,
the police
traffic stops and police breathalyzers and the like. So those sorts of things, which would be happening by people passing through town, visitors sort of coming through, unwanted visitors. But difficult to know. I mean, there'd be a lot of desire lines, I imagine. People just saying, look, it's easy for me to get that way than going around this way.
I think the reality is if they're there, even the residents would be using them. But it doesn't mean they might prefer them to be shut. So the ability to kind of limit and control the flow of movement, whether it's pedestrian or vehicle through a community, is really important. And I think sometimes the solutions are questionable. I don't know. I know you did a project on Alzheimer's. I can't remember what it was, but I remember when I was there, the whole issue of gates on the front of a town camp kept kind of raising its head, and they're kind of. But you kind of know the reality. It's aspirational that we want to have a gate, and what people want to do is to have ability to control visitors coming in and out. But they're just always open because people are naturally coming in and out, and no one's shutting and opening the gate, and it's just pretty.
But that might be okay. Yeah, we've got a gate. People come in and out.
It's just always open.
It's just always open.
Kind of doesn't achieve the goal, does it?
Doesn't.
It still gives them the control.
Exactly. Ever wanted to lock it?
The options are there.
Go into the padlock.
It was certainly the same at Old Timers when we were talking to Robert. He wanted a gate on the riverside and he wanted a gate on the highway side, and a lot of need for control.
How does anyone get in?
Gatekeeper. Robert sits there and punches a card or something.
Yeah.
But you could control that by having a whole lot of bollards, couldn't you? I mean, that's...
Yeah, which they've tried to do in the past. You've seen that.
The rocks and so on.
David mentioned the painted rocks, which will line a highway or a roadway. Be at particular locations.
Stop those tracks everywhere.
Yeah, right. And they seem to work. And someone will budge one out of the way sometimes and sort of go through. But
they were there to suit me. There's other ways to do it, like the mounding I talked about. Just a way to sort of make them more user-friendly spaces. Stop cars hooning around in the night. Just like anywhere, any community, you'd want that. It's just a free for all and poor lighting. The lighting's a tricky one. You want bright lights, but then people sleeping out. So street lights is really important, right? But then people sleep outside at night and can't sleep. The bloody street lights are just too bright. So then you go, can we dim them? So
bollards with lights in them.
Well, all of that.
It's sounding very European now, aren't we? Sort of spreading across footpaths and things like that. So the birds aren't interfered with. But
it's hard to sleep under a street light.
Yeah, if the light is so high. I mean,
if they're too bright. I mean, I don't know. They used to just say, can we just dim them and just have them on half light? seemed to be a solution, but then that probably didn't tick the luminance box for the Power and Water Authority when they came in and go, no, streetlight must be this bright.
Yeah. And again, in Alice Springs proper, they don't seem to have those problems with people with informal roads. I mean, in the suburbs, I'm talking about around Alice Springs, but in the suburbs, they don't have that problem because the properties are closer together. I mean, I'm asking the question. I mean, it seems to be a problem inside the town camps because there's more space on the side of the road.
You're talking about
I'm asking,
traffic or lights or?
Oh, sorry, I'm talking about the informal roads and people going off.
A little bit around some of the, yes, those sort of neighborhoods that are kind of on the edge of bush in a sense. You'll get these informal roads, sort of shortcuts, particularly in the sort of that new development that's out sort of to the west of Alice Springs as you're heading out, sort of towards the desert park. There's that community that's maybe 10 years old on the right. There's heaps of ungazetted roads sort of on their fringes, so there'd be a lot of people kind of taking shortcuts through to get out to the bush and the like there. So you probably have it in those elements. So maybe it's those kind of loose, ill-defined sort of boundaries in a sense where you get that condition. Here,
People go out to get firewood, all sorts of stuff reasons.
Frontier country. Okay. Any questions? We have been here for a while, but
if there was any sort of specific, I'm doing at that part.
Yeah.
If there's anything specific to there that's part of.
You're not doing a job on it. Where do we begin?
yeah, Undupper's complex, isn't it? Without going there, but.
So you're not going there. This is all done. So
Kyle is going because Kyle. There's two students in this class who are also in the elective. So yeah.
Yeah. Look, each place has its own unique sort of qualities and different histories and. Yeah. Nothing particular.
I can't be unique or too specific about Undupper.
But the community centre is. I mean, there's a Christianity.
Element.
It's Rabunja.
Yeah. It used to be a little kind of meeting place for religious services and things like that. Ellie Rabunja was the pastor out there. Yeah. So there'd be a bit of history to it.
Eli.
Yeah.
Eli was Rabunja. He was one of the original sort of founders. Eli and Wenton Rabunja. Yeah, kind of the two kind of forefathers in a way of the town camp, sort of forming them up and trying to bring these different groups together. And he was also a pastor. At Undupper and ran the church there.
Have you read The Town Grew Up Dancing? Has that been sort of part of your...
No, I don't know that. What's that?
It's about Wenton Rabunja and Alice Springs Town Camps.
Okay.
It's called The Town Grew Up Dancing. It's quite a good kind of background to the town camp movement. And
because it was Rabunja who set it up, wasn't it? Or,
he was
in the 1970s. Yeah. Okay.
He was one of the founders.
I haven't given. I've got a lot of source information. I haven't given it to these guys yet. But there's also a PhD that someone wrote about the history of the town camps, which I've read part of, and it's very interesting.
Is that the Coglan?
Yes.
Training.
Yeah. So I've got a copy of that.
Yeah.
In there as well. Okay. So. Okay. So I'd like to really thank you for coming in and sitting in the hot seat for so long. It's been great. And
It's a super hot section.
yeah, because it's such a really interesting terrain, and I mean that in very architectural ways, that it's not often that we explore some of these things. So it's been really good to hear from you and your experiences there. It's been
Yeah,
fantastic.
look, it's been great to talk, and I think there's been a clear hesitation to answer questions straight on. Part of that comes out of having spent a lot of time living in a place, and you kind of, there's just I don't know, just something happens, and you think about things differently. And I think perhaps the biggest hesitation is the issue of being aware of who you are, what your history is, and what you can speak for and what you can't speak for. And it's difficult often to, particularly as two white fellas sitting up here, speak. The risk is sounding as if we're speaking on behalf of the people, and we can't do that. We just simply aren't equipped to do that. And so there's certainly a lot of hesitation to kind of answer some questions, because you start to head into that terrain, and it's delicate, difficult terrain to negotiate sometimes. And I guess that's the kind of skill and the training, and it's a lifetime project in a sense to kind of figure out where you are and how you sit in that world, what you can do and what you can contribute and what your limitations are. And over a number of years, I'm less certain today than I was when I first got there.
Yeah.
I think doubt is kind of the big thing that we don't need to necessarily want to push away, but actually embrace in a sense. It'll probably make you a better architect.
Yeah. It's true, and perhaps pushing on those questions is also an uncomfortableness I feel as well, and I have very limited time compared to yourselves, but I feel more uncomfortable about things the more I know about them, but I suppose I want to find out why I feel uncomfortable about that, and I think that's an interesting
and a lot of that
terrain.
is about our journey, trying to figure it
Absolutely,
out
yeah.
for ourselves. It's not and we have to know when it's us we're trying to figure out, rather than somebody else we're trying to figure out where that line is, I suppose. And that's fine. Yeah, we do it.
So this is part of the asset that these students have, is that they haven't been to Alice Springs and they're being introduced to something which sounds like a very interesting and different problem. But for that reason, you have great license as well, to really find out what you think needs to be found out, and to imagine things that you don't have to be responsible for, I suppose, in that sense, which is a really interesting terrain, I think. Like, being a student affords you that time. So it doesn't mean that you dismiss what's in front of you. It means that you're not having to be responsible. You don't actually have to build it, or it doesn't have to be answerable. You're there to listen and learn as much as you can, but then simply imagine into that space. And I think that's a really interesting architectural problem. And the fact that it's laden with a lot of these things that we feel perhaps a little bit uncomfortable talking about and imagining and things like that, I think for all that reason it makes it really interesting architectural problem for yourselves.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this to you, Chris. We're just sort of in the process of scheduling this now. So, but there could be some opportunities coming in the future if anyone is sort of particularly keen to sort of get an understanding of housing for health work. We are starting to run some projects again in the centre, at least over the next couple of years, even if not this year, next year. Some projects in Alice, and it could be. In the past, we've actually often had students spend some time on a project, and it's a nice way, because you're not there to ask questions. You're just there working alongside residents, surveying and fixing houses. And it can be a really nice way to sort of just very quietly get a greater depth of understanding of people's issues when they're in there, nuts and bolts, sort of shaking their shitty toilet pan to see if it works, or flushing the toilet and timing it, and just getting right in there, down in the dirty, and it can be a nice way to sort of understand and think, and you certainly don't come out of one of those projects. You certainly come out of it different when you start. I'll let Chris know, or
Yeah.
If anyone's particularly keen, you can also feel free to contact me. I'm just in Newcastle. So, yeah.
Well, I've mentioned, I think I mentioned to you earlier, and I've mentioned to these guys as well, that it would be great in week 12, in 4 weeks' time, to have some way where we might show you, or they might show you what they're thinking, just in terms of some recoil as some sort of something. Okay.
Thank you.
Right,
Thanks, guys. Great. It's a long time, isn't it?